So your math student is ready to hand in their math test. And if you're anything like me, you would ask them, did you check your work? And if they're anything like my students, or like my students used to be, they might say yes, or they might say no. And then they take their paper back and check it for a minute or two, which kind of meant, is there an answer? Is there work on the paper? And then they'd be ready to hand it in again. But they wouldn't really do checking like I was thinking of checking. And so early on, it occurred to me when I was teaching fifth grade math that checking math work for me and checking math work for them didn't mean the same thing. So we realized I had to start teaching them how to check their work. And so I've got 5 quick strategies for you today. Maybe you already used some of these. Maybe you've got some great other ones that you could share. But the first one is to redo every problem. Now, I know kids don't like to redo every problem, but if they redo their problems on a separate sheet of paper, that helps them to see possible errors. You know how it is when you're checking something that you've done, you're proofreading something or you're double checking your work and you know what it's supposed to say and you know what you think the answer is. So you don't pick up your mistakes quite as easily as if you're checking somebody else's work. And so if you flip the paper over, they use a separate piece of paper, they don't look at their current answer, and they just redo the problem, they often find little errors that they made and would not have caught if they had just looked at their work. Sometimes tests are a little too long to redo every problem, so if they redo each type of problem, that would be helpful. That way they can check their process and make sure that they did the correct process each time and double check that, and then they could check the work that they had on their paper. So redoing the problems is really helpful. And then comparing the answers to see if they actually are the same. Using the opposite operation is really helpful, depending on the complexity of the test itself and, what they're working on. But, sometimes kids think 7 plus 5 is 13, but if they double check 13 minus 5 and actually count backwards, do they get 7? So opposite operations are great. Is the answer logical? And we know logical is sometimes tough for kids. Sometimes logical, they're not sure what that means. So if you say to them, does the answer make sense? They look at it and looks good to them, they say sure. But if, is it logical? Is it reasonable? For example, if you're doing a decimal test and you're saying 2.2 times 7.9 and you get the answer of 2, students should start to look at those and say, okay, the problem was 2-ish times 8. That does not equal 2. So to stop and think, is my answer logical? Substitution is another great one for the types of problems that allow for substitution, algebraic equations, and as students are getting into more complex math, they can substitute as we teach them to make sure that their answer is correct. And then rereading, not just rereading the problem, but rereading the directions to make sure that they did what the directions said. Reread the problem if it's a word problem to make sure they didn't skip over any numbers that were written as words and miss those. And then rereading the question to make sure that they are actually answering what the question asked them rather than, just something. Because sometimes, they just pick up the numbers and then they write down something and they didn't stop to think, are they answering the question? So those are 5 quick things. I made at one point in time a sheet for the students that they could keep with them during their tests so that they could go back and say, okay, which of these could I use to check my answers? And just to remind them, because it doesn't give them any math information, it just gives them some strategies to use. So that is available on my blog. If you wanted to hop over to my blog and grab that, it's a free download. I'll put the link to that in my comments. And if you have any other quick strategies that would be really helpful to students in learning to check their work, I'd love for you to put those in the comments as well. And in case you don't know me, I'm Ellie, and I'm with Middle School Math Moments. Talk to you soon. Bye.